This presentation explores how digital collection and analysis of images and language shift how we explain storytelling about non-Western cultures. Digital resources make culturally, geographically rooted phenomena and works about them more mobile, molecular, nomadic across time and space. Jean-Marie Leclésio, 2008 Nobel laureate, a pioneer in French post-colonial writing, French mainland post-colonial writing, and Chris Abani, Nigerian-born novelist and poet, write about a cultural phenomenon indigenous to Igbo and Egu peoples of Nigeria, Igbo-Ishi, to cut Ichi, I-C-H-I, or ritual facial scarifications. Leclésio and Abani use these marks or signs to map stories about fathers and cultures. Abani's works, more recent, is more imbued with digital culture, notably in its patchwork composition, which the theme of the Ichi unifies. Quote, cutting Ichi, says Abani, is an old practice mostly died out, end quote, of ritual scarifications, signs symbolizing sun, moon, and falcon among Amundri princes between Niger and cross rivers of Nigeria, which I show you in this picture. Leclésio, in his novel Onitsha and biographical essay The African, which I didn't show you, depicts his adolescent year, 1948, in Ogoja, Nigeria, replaced in the novel by the town Onitsha. Leclésio's father, a doctor in British colonial service, befriended British ethnographer M.D.W. Jeffries, who studied Amundri culture and tied it to the thesis of migration of ancient Egyptian peoples and knowledge to the Niger River from the upper Nile River. This is an ancient migration. The pictures I show are from Jeffries' publications. Here is a sacred statue in one of the Amundri temples. Shows the scarifications. They're a little bit hard to see. I will link Leclésio and Abani to a virtual museum and library, including MWD's Jeffries' dissertation, available in British libraries' ETHESES online service. That virtual museum and library shows how digital world cultural artifacts enrich our grasp of writers of transcultural identity. While in New Zealand, Maori carvings of a Waranui community house remind the writer Abani of the Ichi marks and of his father, a man of princely extraction, but never consecrated with the divine scars. Oxford educated, upon return to Nigeria, hard drinking, angry, which he took out on his white wife and on his mixed-race son, Abani. Neither Auckland Art Gallery, Toi Otamaki, nor the Auckland War Memorial Museum affords easy digital access to their collections, but Paris Quai Branly Museum has digitalized all of its artifacts. So here's a picture from the Paris Quai Branly Museum. It's a Maori mask and a molding of a prince's tattoo-like face, like the works arousing Ichi and Chris Abani's mind in his book. Leclésio uses the Ichi to critique his own colonial experience in Nigeria, this is Leclésio, via his novel's characters, Father Geoffroy, separated by World War II from wife Mau and son Fenton, who rejoined him in Nigeria only in 1948. And Clarisse and I, when we're referring to Father Geoffrey, will use the French pronunciation Geoffroy to distinguish him from real-life ethnographer M.W.D. Jeffries, also important for these stories and a friend of the Leclésio family. Leclésio uses iconography in the novel Onitsha. This is a graphic design in his novel of the Ichi. And in the biographical essay, The African, he used his father's photographs taken in the 1940s of Cameroon, people in Cameroon, and people in Nigeria. In the novel, Leclésio deploys narrow print columns, which Clarisse will analyze, to carve fictional Father Geoffroy's obsession with the Ichi marks. Here we have a picture of the page, and you'll see this again when Clarisse goes to her more digital analysis. Abani doesn't use pictures to show Ichi or scars his father gave him. Instead, he deploys curt chapters, verbal jump cuts, dialogues, jokes, Microsoft Word formatted lists to compare son and father. Abani's text is more mobile, like an Alexander Calder mobile, where we see the parts interacting. And his initiation spans Nigeria, where his father derides and beats him, London, where he escaped with his mother, Los Angeles, where he studied, and New Zealand, where he sees the Maori works that impelled his word carving of the Ichi, And here is his page, but I will not read this. He describes the physical cutting of the ichi, the traditional ceremony. Abani says, quote, "To cut ichi is to be reborn in the path of true visions, to be held to a higher morality. It was impossible to hide the face, to disguise oneself and commit sins and crimes." Elder Umundri sons and daughters who survived scarification, it was very dangerous, were marked as scions of Anu, or Anwanyu, the sun god. And this brings us into contact with gods of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which Leclésio's fictional father, Geoffroy in Anicha, cites as linguistic proof of the cultural mixing in Igbo land. Ethnographer M.D.W. Jeffrey's thesis on migration of Egyptian culture is omnipresent in Leclésio's novel. His character Geoffroy, dreams of the ancient exodus from what we would call today Ethiopia, and more specifically from the Nubian city Meroe, thousands of miles southward to the Niger Delta. Geoffroy also dreams of his own ritual initiation with the Ichi marks. He becomes really obsessed. When he loses his job because of this at the firm United Africa and returns to Europe, he never quits his dreams, which in what seems at first glance to be a colonialist racist maneuver, implies Egyptian superiority over sub-Saharan peoples. I quote, "Black peoples of the Niger Delta allied with the people of Meroe," end quote, "the black peoples bringing fruit, seed, animal skins, while Egyptians bring superior science and the religion of Anu and Osiris, symbolized by the Ichi. But, at second glance, Geoffroy in fact insists that it was the people of the black queen Amanirenas who migrated from the Nubia to the Niger, thus depicting the encounter of Nubians and Igbo as the fusion of two thoroughly black cultures. This drives into the controversy between Afrocentrism and the thesis of Black Athena. The fictional father Geoffroy, before he leaves Nigeria, has a bear of the Ichi marks, Okaho, guide him to the origin of these sacred sites, the ruined oracle of Aroshukwu near the Cross River. This is actually a static picture of these carvings. And here I'm going to take you to the Factum Foundation for Digital Technology and Preservation, which has as its project making 3D models of these hundreds of carvings, stone monoliths. It's actually a very neat site. I'm used to a Mac. I think I'll be able to manipulate this, but you can see, if I don't tip too far there, how this resembles these Ichi carvings that the character Jeffrey is obsessed with, and which Chris Abani uses as the driving metaphor for his book, which is an essay. But this is a very good site. They have several different projects. That 3D model, you saw the static images of the petroglyphs, which Jeffrey are proof of the Nubian migration. Like his son Fintan, Leclésio lived his time in Nigeria as euphoric rebirth, like Geoffroy's son Fintan. Running free in the brush was liberation, quote, "a treasure still deep alive within me. Africa was taking my face away," end quote. This changes his identity as the cutting of the Ichi might, and here in this last slide is a quotation from Leclésio on screen. "In every moment I am transpierced by the other time in Agoja. Something was given to me, something was taken away. That boy of 1948, no story, no journey will ever make it possible for me to reach him again." So the Ichi lived in the mode of loss. Abani, too, feels both loss and gain when he peers back at his father. Quote, "To wear the face of someone you can't help loving, even as you can't help hating them, is to be caught in an infernal struggle for your own soul," he says. But he draws from it a lesson in African thought to, quote, "cultivate the right face," end quote. Without father's genes and physical blows, his own face wouldn't be what it is. And other people leave different sorts of marks, as he says in the second quote on screen. "I think of all the people who have touched my face, slapped it, punched it, kissed it, washed it, shaved it. All that human contact must leave some trace, some of the need and anger that motivated that touch. This face, his face, is softened by it all." And with that being said, Clarisse now turns to Leclésio's son Fintan and how he inherits his father's dilemmas, showing the nomadic quality of post-colonial writing.
Switching the microphone.
Yep. There we go.
Is that okay? All right. Okay. Just there. All right. So the novel Initia by Le Clésio was published in 1991, and it tells the story of Fintan, the son of Mahou, a French woman, and of Geoffroy, an Englishman. So the action takes place in 1948 in Nigeria, soon after World War II, and the reader witnesses conflicts on several levels, whether they're among individuals like Fintan and his father, or among communities between settlers and colonized people. In the novel, we found passages with larger margins on the sides that represent the thoughts, dreams, and exploration of Geoffroy regarding the migration history of the people of Meroe. The novel is dedicated to M.W.D. Jeffries that Professor Kelly mentioned, and so it uses the itchy sign as a leitmotif representing a quest for Geoffroy that goes beyond a mere historical interest. As it is hard to determine the origin of the African migration, Tales from Legends about the Queen of Meroe is intertwined with historical testimonies. These elements mingle in the columns representing Geoffroy's thoughts, in which we can see that he internalizes their discursive characteristics to the point of isolating himself further into his imagination and further away from his own family. So to determine the discursive ideology of these passages, we must first go through a linguistic and stylistic study. So the scholar Leo Spitzer noted about stylistic, and I quote, "The purely linguistic knowledge answering the question how a variation occurs only has an instrumental value and subordinates itself to the question why it occurs." So we'll see first how Geoffroy's speech manifests itself to then be able to determine why it happens. So first we'll list the principal elements illustrating Geoffroy's obsession, looking at both lexicon and syntax. And then we'll see how this obsessive speech leads to Geoffroy's isolation that is not only ideological, but also spiritual and psychological. So I resorted to Voyant to analyze the digital version of the columns. So among the most common occurrences, and so you see the French terms, but I put the most common in English. So river is 63 times, Meroe is 36, sign 29. When you compare with, for instance, Fintan, his own son, it only appears once in the columns. So thanks to Voyant, we can acknowledge the prevalence of certain words through the word clouds that you can see here. So yeah, Voyant is kind of basic, but this type of visualization is actually useful as it allows an immediate apprehension of a text lexicon. The word cloud here transcribes the lexical frequency through word sizes. The more frequent, the physically bigger you can see it. So this process mimics the metaphorical place of certain terms in Geoffroy's speech. And the word cloud illustrates the internal discourse, here literally cluttered and obsessed with some concepts. The word sun appears 15 times, but when you look at the context in which it's used, actually only one occurrence referred to Fintan, Geoffroy's actual son. The other 14 references refer to historical or legendary characters. So even words related to family are actually linked to the legend of Meroe and not Geoffroy's actual family. So let's now turn to syntax. Some syntactic structures repeat themselves. And there were several other examples, but I'm just going to show a couple. So, for instance, there are 49 occurrences of the structure of the type it's plus nominal phrase plus relative pronouns, like is the sign that entered his mind, it is her whom he sees. So this type of structure creates an emphatic process, highlighting the nominal phrase as it appears first in the sentence, whether the nominal phrase is a subject or object of the following verb that you can see in the two examples. And so among these occurrences, 45 refer directly or indirectly to the elements of Geoffroy's legendary quest. Also in Geoffroy's speech, the theme, what the speaker talks about, is typically maintained beyond the first sentence, beyond the sentence the theme first appeared in. So let's look at a few paragraphs. By the way, this paragraph was twice as long in the original page. I just cut it, but it's much longer than this. So the theme of the discourse that I bolded is the Umundri, the people Geoffroy is passionate about. And this theme is maintained throughout the whole passage, only referred by the pronoun they, them. So at first, the pronoun origin is easily understood. However, at the third paragraph, it's harder to follow because other characters, Mao and this son, are mentioned, and grammatically they could correspond to the pronouns following they and them. So a mere morphological knowledge, pronominal and verbal marks of plural, is not enough to solve the origin of the pronouns and to follow the rhythm of the speech. And so this thematic continuation really strengthens the obsessive quality of Geoffroy's internal discourse, and it offers the reader a total discursive immersion, demanding the reader to engage in active reading and remembering. So let's now see how isolated Geoffroy is in his obsession. So first, the format that we mentioned before. It's pretty eloquent. It really brings out his speech compared to the rest of the novel that has actual normal margins. And so throughout these columns, he only talks about this quest for Meroë. And so we saw that this vocabulary is very prevalent, and about like the sign, the river, etc. But he had access to this vocabulary through other people. For instance, a colonial administrator, historical work, and also native people. And so after a while, Geoffroy is actually going to internalize the speech. And so because of this continuous internalization, it's predictable that this language is actually going to pervade the column and his speech. So he's going to make this speech that came from the outside, from other people, his own, illustrating perfectly the speech internalization phenomenon described by literary theorist Bakhtin. As he's saying, I quote, "The word in language is half someone else's." And he distinguishes two linguistic forces in a discourse, centripetal force and centrifugal force. So the story of Meroë acts first as centrifugal, meaning external to Geoffroy. But then later on, Geoffroy is going to absorb the discursive force completely as his own, and is going to become unified to his own internal speech. So yeah, I'm going to cut this part. All right, sorry, I'm a bit out of time. It's also interesting to look at deictics, like shifters, so that's saying there, here, because, and I'm going to quote Ben Venist, the linguist, the only reality they refer to is the reality of the speech they appear in. They organize the spatial and temporal relationships around the subject speaker, who's taken as a point of reference. So there are a lot of deictics in Geoffroy's speech. So for instance, there and here are mentioned quite a bit of time. Here is more anchored in the immediate reality, and we see that it's less mentioned than there, that refers to a further away reality. But what's really interesting is also the relative uses of the most common terms among each others. So on this graph, you can see that from the beginning of the text, so it's actually the whole text of the columns. And so you see the most common occurrences. And so at first, they're homogeneously intertwined, like river, sun, etc. But at some point, you're going to see, for instance, this big spike for a river in the middle. And it really is showing some kind of pinnacle in Geoffroy's quest. And what's very interesting is also that, so you see the name of Geoffroy in green. At first, again, it's kind of mingled with other terms, but at the very end, it actually appears like very, very much on its own at the end. So this process, as you can see, that Geoffroy actually emerges from the other terms. It's finally dominating all the other terms that were actually dominating himself throughout the whole story. It actually indicates that Geoffroy's self-consciousness, by repeating his name, arises and settles down. And so the quest of Meroë was eventually not just a historical investigation, but actually a spiritual and personal one. So I'm actually going to go to the conclusion right away. Can I? Yeah, okay, real quick. So what's very interesting is that when you look at the last part of the novel, it's the same format of the column, but it's actually a letter by Fintan to his sister, Marima, who was conceived in Nigeria, but she never lived there. And so that's actually a letter from Fintan, who's an adult. And so he's writing to her, and when you look at his speech, the most common occurrences are Onitsha, river, and there. So in this letter, it appears that Fintan is concerned that Marima will never feel a bond with Nigeria. And so he really tries to transmit to her his African experience and what it meant to him. So the memory keeps on living, and that really echoes Leclésio's own struggle in real life that Professor Kelly mentioned earlier. So yeah, and Fintan, who used to reject his father, has actually eventually absorbed his dad's discursive habits and obsession for the spiritual aspects of Nigeria, showing a father-son transmission of ideology through discourse. That's it.
No, I think that's a very good question, and one of the links is actually Liz McGonigal put together a catalog of the Onitsha market literature for the KU libraries, and I didn't get time to put the link into that. Leclésio is depicting Onitsha in 1948, so it really is a town rather than a city. And my understanding of the Onitsha market literature is that it grew exponentially through decolonization and post-colonization into the post-colony with the population growth of Onitsha, which is a huge city now. So it's almost as if that also has been lost because Onitsha, when he's publishing this in 1991, is just no longer what he's... And he can run all around the town, and his the culture is oral rather than a print culture too. So he's hearing stories from different inhabitants of Onitsha about this culture as well.
But I think that's kind of part of the issue, that there was a print culture earlier, and so if you come in the 90s and somehow the view is that there is no longer a print culture, it seems to omit that there was the culture. So,
and I don't know the Onitsha market literature well enough to be able to talk about it in relation to the Leclésio.
Creolized languages in English mixed, whatever the term for that is. But I'm just saying that there is a rethinking of what was oral and what was written, because it's kind of a period that we just don't think about too much. But thank you for reminding me about Liz's work.
Yeah, no, I thought about it too when I was we were preparing this.
Questions? Yes.
I just want to make sure I understood correctly. So the main character is Fintan. Is that correct?
Yeah, he's a little boy at first, yes.
And both of his parents are European?
Yes, so his mom is French and his dad is English, and he never knew his dad until he came to Nigeria.
World War II separated them.
When you say his, is it Fintan or is it Geoffroy?
He's part of, is he there as a soldier or?
Oh, so Geoffroy is colonial administrator. He's not in combat at all. He's just, administrating. And so Fintan, when he arrives to Nigeria, he's about 8, if I'm not wrong. And so what's really interesting is you see his own perspective with this estranged father, and then because Geoffroy, so the father, never really talks to his family, and so then like you can see very distant relationships at first, and then you get to see the Collins, and you really see, you know, his insight that his family never had access to. So that's his perspective, yeah.
The best critics of Onitsha read it as Leclésio's admission that he can never be entirely on the side of the colonial subject. But Fantin he almost makes it over to the other side through his friendships with other Onitshan children, and then realizes he can't. Mm-hmm. So it mirrors his father, though his father is more colonialist.